Shalom from Jerusalem. This is TV7's Israel at War update. And as we continue to deliberate the latest from the Gaza Strip and elsewhere, it's always important to highlight that 110 days ago, the Islamist terror groups from the Hamas-plagued Gaza Strip launched an onslaught on southern Israel, declaring war by perpetrating a massacre, murdering some 1,200 mostly civilians, wounding over 4,800 others, and kidnapping 246 people, including elderly, men, women, and children, as well as infants. 136 of them remain in Hamas captivity to date. Let's now turn to our TV7 editor-at-large, Mr. Amir Oren. Amir, what can you update us on the latest?
So, as the families of these hostages are visibly frustrated and have started to protest against the government, what is happening in Gaza itself is apparently the last battle of this particular campaign around Khan Yunis. Apparently, the Israeli Defense Forces believe that Yahya Sinwar, Mohammad Def, and Marwan Issa, the three leaders of the military arm of Hamas, the so-called Zadina Qassam brigades, are hiding in a tunnel or several tunnels under the southern city of Khan Yunis. They are also holding hostages, whether with them or in other tunnels. Yesterday, the IDF announced that the encirclement of Khan Yunis has been completed, and that now elite forces, the three battalions of the Commando Brigade and other special units, which went unnamed, but obviously are of the most select forces which Israel has. They are now looking underground for both Sinwar and his co-leaders and the hostages. Now, when they get to their destinations, we will find out whether the intelligence which led them there and the operational design, because obviously it's a very delicate operation to both get the Hamas leadership without hurting the hostages, whether this was effective. If not, if it turns out that both Sinwar and the hostages have been spirited out of Khan Yunis to Rafah, or alternatively back to northern or central Gaza, then the pressure to get a hostage deal will obviously grow, because it would not seem effective for the IDF to look much further. So this is where things are in Gaza. There are firefights going on. Dozens of Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad operatives have been killed or taken prisoner. And in other news in the region, the more assertive policy of the United States has been apparent this time in Iraq, in strikes against Khatayeb Hezbollah.
Indeed. Well, before we engage on the whole regional spectrum of things, I'd like to turn to the commander of the Israeli Air Force Task Force for Air and Missile Defense, Brigadier General in Reserve Doron Gavish. Thank you for joining us, General. I'd like actually to ask you to expand on the situation in the Gaza Strip. We have Division 261, which is operating to already establish some sort of security belt that will then provide, at least from a military perspective, security necessary to guarantee the well-being of the southern residents of the Gaza periphery community, so to speak. What can you tell us about that? Where are we in this process, as well as what Mr. Olen also referred to? Since, from what I hear, from different commanders, also in the Gaza Strip proper, but also in the higher echelons of command, that they do intend to persist in various operations to eradicate the terror infrastructure of the Islamist Hamas, which is far from over.
Indeed, Jonathan, I think it is important, firstly, to mention that the goals of the war are still in front of us. They are in front of us in two means. One of them, we are still looking at them and being those two goals of the war. As you mentioned, eradicate the Hamas. We don't want them anymore as the ruler of the Gaza Strip. And, of course, to bring back the hostages. The other goal that we see more and more now is that although at least the IDF is not talking in terms of day after and so on, but there are efforts in order to have this security belt that we are seeing, and unfortunately, the disaster that we had with the 21 soldiers that were killed were doing exactly this mission. So this is for sure something that is going on. So the two goals are, when I was saying in front of us, so the other thing which is in front of us, this is something that is going still to take some time in front of us in a matter of time. It is not something that would be finished tomorrow. The IDF is planning, is calculating its efforts in the Gaza Strip. This is why we see some rotations of our reserves. So we could say in general that, and I think Amir described it quite well, that in Khan Yunis we see special forces effort led by the 98th Division, and those forces are going to be the ones that hopefully will bring the hostages back, and hopefully will be the ones that will hit the Hamas leaders, which hopefully they are still in this area. At least this is what intelligence is saying. The other forces in the northern part of the Gaza Strip, we talked about this belt that is being designed, but there is still, we have to remember the camps in the center part of the Gaza Strip and the northern cities that are over there, and still there is a job to go and to make sure that all this area is clean from terrorists. And so the forces are continuously scanning this area. We have to remember that although we are in control of this area, here and there we see some terrorists that are acting. We have to say that they are not acting under a hierarchic, I would say, military structure. They are here and there. Each one is taking his own initiative, but we still see them also in the northern part of the Gaza Strip. So we have to make sure that the IDF is, as we are saying in military terms, cleaning this area from those terrorists. So those are the three main efforts that we see in the Gaza Strip. And we also have to remember that still the IDF is facilitating and enabling the population, the civilian population in the Gaza Strip to have its aid, food, some food, water, medicine, whatever is needed. This is also an effort that is being made by the IDF during this time.
And of course, the essence of guerrilla war fights are that you have all kind of cells operating on their own behest within a certain framework that was agreed upon beforehand, trying to exact as much as possible damage from their adversaries.
Indeed. Yeah, you right in the right words.
Yes, sir. Well, Mr. Owen, I'd like to turn to the northern front of Israel, Lebanon. We had 3 projectiles fired towards Haldov not long time ago. Other activities are also taking place, including, particularly in Beirut, we saw that the Al-Hariri hospital was holding an exercise for an all-out war in the event that such a conflagration would take place. What can you tell us about that, and what are the circumstances right now on the diplomatic front as the United States continues to try and alleviate the tensions that persist? We have to put it on the table. Over 60,000 Israelis are internally displaced by instructions of the government, including additional thousands who've left on their own volition.
Yes, there are second thoughts in Israel regarding this evacuation, not of those settlements which are adjacent to the border. Some of them are indeed yards away from the other side. They have some fields or some groves, and then they have their own homes. There are houses there, and in some cases, apartment buildings. They obviously cannot stare down the gun barrels of Hezbollah operatives on the other side. They are not coming back until they are assured of security. But there are some settlements further away where there is at least some staff work being conducted on whether they could go back, because while they are liable once in a while to be hit by a rocket if General Gavish's friends do not intercept it, nevertheless, it is not as if they are constantly under direct fire. But you know, Jonathan, there is a double complexity here. One dimension of the complexity is that the northern border is tied to the southern border. And Hezbollah has been saying since October the 8th, the day after the Hamas barbaric onslaught, when Hezbollah joined the fight, that when there is a ceasefire in Gaza, they too will keep a ceasefire. However, the complexity has to do with the fact that the military is tied with the political, and both of them are tied with the diplomatic. For instance, one of the ministers in Netanyahu's government, Itamar Ben-Gvir, who heads a very extreme party, announced earlier this week that once the war is over, the government is over too. That means that there is a vested interest in whoever wants the government to survive, and mostly Netanyahu himself, to go on with the war. But this runs counter to the wishes of the Biden administration, without whose assistance Israel would have a hard time persisting in the war. That means that the Israeli government, and especially the emergency war cabinet, will have to treat very carefully between both poles, those leaning in the direction of prolonging the war and going for what Netanyahu calls total victory. Nothing relative, nothing partial, only an absolute victory. He didn't define it, but this is his call for action. And the other pole, probably represented by Benny Gantz and Gadi Eisenkot, who are rivals to this government but joined the war cabinet, who may consider leaving the government once there is some inflection point or a ceasefire.
I'll try to dissect it briefly. One point I think is very important to highlight, and that is any minority government is subject to even the smallest margins of that government if it tips the scale, and therefore there is a lot of leverage to the smaller factions within such governments in order to try and force a certain policy or a certain decision to their advantage or their interests. The government currently is fractured. We need to put things as they are. However, it doesn't necessarily mean that it is influencing the decision making of the war in a vigorous way that impacts the operational considerations of the IDF. And that is also something that we need to emphasize. Nonetheless, we need to also highlight that, at least in my opinion, based on what I can see, a decisive blow which would degrade Hamas to the point of no return, in which other factions or clans within the Gaza Strip would be able to outmaneuver Hamas and by doing so claim governance, and then also build up their own military capabilities to subdue any opposing forces within the Muslim Brotherhood, which obviously backs Hamas, or other elements, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, that continues to receive support from the Islamic Republic of Iran. I don't see that happening right now.
Well, again, this would run counter to the express wishes of the Biden administration, especially what is called the Tokyo outline or platform, which Secretary of State Blinken unveiled some 2 months ago, on November the 8th, I believe, in Japan, and which calls for a reformed, reinvigorated Palestinian Authority taking over in Gaza, where it lost power in 2006 and especially a year later. And of course, this would come at a price that Israel would have to pay, and the price would be finding a path to a Palestinian state, which obviously Netanyahu opposes, as long as this is a state which could endanger Israel. So all of these balls are in the air, and they are not yet in any order.
With regard to the Biden administration, I think that its statement is wishful thinking in this stage. Again, based on the various circumstances we're currently living in, we need to understand that post-October 7th, many people who prior to that atrocious onslaught and massacre supported a certain coexistence within the framework of a two-state solution have lost that, are no longer that considered to be proponents, and therefore to be able to build confidence within Israeli society to the point of doing something like that would take much longer than the days in which the Biden administration hopes to remain in office, even though it might be much shorter than that. But let's turn to General Gavish, and I'd like to ask you, particularly on the northern front once more, what are we seeing, as I mentioned, about the projectiles being launched towards Israel? There is an ongoing battle under the war threshold, as you always highlight. Nevertheless, what can be done in order to change the equation in which Israelis are still unsecure? We heard the Security Cabinet, the War Cabinet more particularly, engaging with the regional council heads of northern Israel. The communities are very, very frustrated with the situation in which the government cannot guarantee, due to international concerns, including, namely, the Biden administration thwarting any attempt of Israel to conflagrate the situation and push Hezbollah back north of the Litani River, in correlation, of course, in tandem with the UN Security Council Resolution 1701.
Indeed, Jonathan, and you know, we are in a complex world, we should say, and in this complex and complicated world, we are in a very complex and complicated area. And this goes, you know, I'm on uniform, so I cannot refer to the discussion that you had before, but this goes also to this arena, to the political arena, but also to the military arena. And unfortunately, we are really in a situation that there is no a very good and clear solution, and everyone is going toward. There are solutions, but for each one of them, there is a price to pay. And this is really the challenge that our cabinet and Israel have to deal with during this time. And this goes back even to your question. First of all, is the first question that Israel asked himself is what is the main efforts that we see for ourselves during this war? And I have to say that although we know what was the Biden administration point of view, also Israel thought, let's say the majority of the leaders of Israel thought that this is not the best time to start a war, in both sides. I can give you one of the strategic, I would say, thoughts that were during this time, and I'm going back to the first week of the war. One of the strategic thoughts was that this is exactly what Sinwar and the Hamas wanted. They wanted to start the strike against Israel, and then they wanted the war to be as much as they can, the larger war, and then they would become a secondary arena, and Israel would be occupied with others. I'm not sure that this, for example, would go for the favorite of Israel. So there are also some strategic application to it. Also, the Israeli military, although it is built to fight in the few areas, you still you prefer to concentrate in one area and then to do whatever you can in this area. So there are really all kind of I would say things that you have to calculate once you decide what you want to do with the northern arena. The last thing that I would refer to is to what was mentioned by Amir, which is also very right. I think Amir touched a very important point, that we are not sure that if today we would have to make a decision about evacuating the cities in the northern part of Israel, that we would behave the same. If we would know 3 months ago what we know today, I'm not sure that we would behave the same. We have to remember that we were in a situation, in a very hard situation, in the first week of this war. No one wanted to take any chances, and this was the result of it. But now, when we are looking at it, maybe things could be different. But this is, always in our life, we are smart after things happen, and it is much harder to be smart before before things happen. And
In Hebrew, we say "Chachamim b'diavad."
Yeah, exactly.
Wise in retrospect.
And really going directly to your question, Jonathan. I always say that we're under the full-scale war because there is a war. It's a low intensity war, but there is a fight. There are fights between Israel and Hamas. If we're looking on the Israeli strategy in the last, I would say 2 to 3 weeks, we see that it is not that Israel is only retaliating like it was in the beginning, but Israel is also initiating all kind of strikes, and some of it Israel take responsibility, some of it we don't know who did it, but we see things happening in Lebanon, in Syria, in some other places. So it is not only that Israel is retaliating toward the Hamas, to the Hezbollah, to what the Hezbollah is doing. And we still have to remember that in order to be effective, we have to have a good offense capabilities in the north. We do have them. We need a good defensive capability, and this is going back to the ability to intercept most of the rockets that are being shot toward Israel. And we know that the Hezbollah has today tried to hit once again the air control unit in Mount Meron, and we know that this time it was very something not serious that was hit over there. But we are in a challenging situation. And the last thing that I would say is that if we know something for sure, is that we are not going to go back to the 6th of October also at the end of this war. The arena would have to be differently or have to be different from what it was in the past?
Well, so long as it's within Israel's control, of course, considering the fact that the international community is raising its pressure on Israel. We hear even UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres claiming that the Gaza situation is the worst he's seen in his tenure as the Secretary General. Well, apparently he didn't look close enough in Russia and Ukraine since the situation would have maybe been a lot better if he was actually hands on deck, but that's a different story. Mr. Owen, we have roughly 1 minute left, and therefore,
Okay.
if you could
may I
focus.
make two short comments regarding the Lebanese border? The first is that Defense Minister Gallant, among other Israelis, warned Lebanon, not only Hezbollah, but the state of Lebanon, that what they can see in Gaza could very well be repeated by Israel if there is a war between Israel and Hezbollah. But this is quite an empty threat, because after what has happened in Gaza, the world, and especially the United States, will obviously try to stop Israel before it has enough time to inflict such damage in Lebanon. The other point is that Israel wants to reassert, to reintroduce Resolution 1701, the situation in the Security Council will not be so conducive for it, because Russia and China are certain to veto it. So it would be very complicated diplomatically and not only militarily.
Indeed. Well, there are many other things that we should to highlight also, of course. The regional issues we had just 2-3 hours ago, another missile being launched from Yemen towards a commercial vessel in the Red Sea. We saw overnight the strikes by the United States against Shuhada Ahl al-Haq, part of the Hashd al-Shabi, or the Popular Mobilization Forces in Iraq proper, after the attack by Kataib Hezbollah towards the in al-Assad air base. Unfortunately, there were 2 American casualties in that attack, but nonetheless, U.S. Pentagon Press Secretary Major General Pat Ryder still highlighted last night that from America's perspective, there is no war, and it's not engaged in war in the region, but rather is trying, together with its allies and partners, to de-escalate the situation. And in such a circumstance, obviously, the Iranians hear it loud and clear and continue to act as a malign actor throughout this region. But this is all the time that we have for today. I'd like to thank General Gavish, Mr. Owen, for taking out of your time to update us on the latest, and I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. Following this update, we will have at 9 p.m. Jerusalem time our regular bulletin, TV7 Israel News, followed also by yet another geostrategic panel of Jerusalem studio with focus on Iran's nuclear program. We will have both Dr. Michael Duran, the Senior Director on Middle East developments at the Hudson Institute, as well as the former Deputy Director of the International Atomic Energy Agency, namely Dr. Olli Heinonen of the Stimson Center in Washington, D.C., who will elaborate quite broadly on this situation. So until then, from here in Jerusalem, Shalom.
I'm Eran Etzion, former Deputy National Security Advisor here in Israel, a diplomat, a strategist by training. I'm very happy to be at TV7 and offer my interpretation along my esteemed colleagues. The strong point of TV7 is to be a reliable source of authoritative insight in an era of shallow news environment that is very difficult for viewers to trust.